Okay, I think we can get started. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being with us, and apologies for the delays. We were just troubleshooting some technical glitches, but we're really excited to be here with you now. My name is Madeline Whittle. I'm a member of the programming team here at Film at Lincoln Center and the 58th New York Film Festival, and it's really exciting to welcome you all to today's edition of the New York Film Festival Talks program. We have been hosting these long, in-depth talks with filmmakers and other panelists over the last week and change now, and we're still going strong, and we're extremely happy for today's installment of our Crosscuts talk section, which is a category of talks that puts filmmakers from two different films into conversation with one another. And we're really excited today and honored to have with us the filmmaking teams from Hopper Wells, which is screening in our Spotlight section of the festival, and the Tango of the Widower and its Distorting Mirror, which just wrapped up its virtual screenings as part of the current section of the festival. So I'll get into that in a bit, but first, if you are watching as an attendee, please do make sure that you are set to the preferred language channel. We have an interpreter who will be helping us out today, interpreting for the team from Tango of the Widower, and so just make sure that you're either listening to the English channel or the Spanish channel, depending on your preference. And so let me dive in with some thanks, first of all. The New York Film Festival has always been about bringing the community together to celebrate cinema. And whether you're joining us in our virtual cinema during this installment of the New York Film Festival, or at one of our drive-in venues for the screenings that we have been holding throughout, on behalf of everyone at Film at Lincoln Center, I want to thank you for being part of this truly historic edition of the festival. Thank you to the Lincoln Center, Film at Lincoln Center board, patrons, members, and dedicated moviegoers who make our work possible throughout the year, most especially during this exciting festival season. And as a nonprofit, we rely on your support, and becoming a member is a great way to join our community of film lovers. You can take advantage of discounts and special offers while helping us to continue sharing the best in cinema with New Yorkers, and in this virtual cinema context, cinema lovers around the world and the country. If you're not a member, you can find out how to become one today on our website, www.filmlink.org. I also want to recognize the tireless efforts of all of the staff and volunteers who've been working behind the scenes for months to make this festival a reality. And you can continue to access the festival from anywhere with this free talk series. It's our most broadly accessible part of the festival because it's free and online and available around the world. And you can also subscribe to the Film at Lincoln Center podcast, where you'll be able to hear audio of dozens of Q&As and discussions. And be sure to subscribe to our newsletter to make sure you don't miss any exciting updates or festival announcements that will continue throughout the next couple of weeks. And be sure to join the conversation by following along on social media, Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. And you can share your festival experience with the hashtag NYFF. Last but not least, a special thank you to our many festival partners, most especially in this case, HBO, who is the presenting partner of Film at Lincoln Center Talks year-round, and specifically New York Film Festival Talks at this time of year. So again, thank you all for joining us. I'll just say a few more words, and then I'll let the conversation kick off. The moderator for today's conversation is my colleague, Dan Sullivan, who is the assistant programmer at Film at Lincoln Center year-round and a member of the Revivals programming team for this edition of New York Film Festival. And he will say a bit more about who we're joined by and the films that they are representing. But finally, just want to say a thank you to our interpreter, Cordelia Montes, who's going to help facilitate this conversation. So without any further ado, I will hand it over to Dan, and thank you all again.
Sure, thanks, Maddie. Yeah, great to be here with you all today. As one of the programmers of the sort of repertory section of the festival, these two films are the two films in other sections that I'm probably the most jealous that they're not my own. They these are undeniably like new films, and yet they're not. And I think we're gonna get into all that, and hopefully it'll be a productive and interesting conversation. But I want to first introduce everyone. So here on behalf of the Tango of the Widower and its distorting mirror, we have the great filmmaker Valeria Sarmiento, the film's editor Galut Alarcón, and we're also joined by producer Chamila Rodríguez. A pleasant surprise, as always. And then from Hopper Wells, we're joined by the filmmaker Filip Jan Rymsza and the editor Bob Murawski. And first of all, thank you all for joining us under these deeply weird global circumstances, but here we are. I wanted to, I guess, begin with the Tango of the Widower and its distorting mirror. In part because I think like this is the of these two films, this is the one that I've known was in the works for the longest. Valeria, you and Chamila have joined us in the past as we've been presenting an ongoing Raúl Ruiz retrospective, and we've used some of the films that were completed after he passed, just sort of structure the series. And I just want to begin by just asking about sort of the origins of the film, the circumstances that led you all to discover that material on this film even survived today. And could you just, I want to get into the reconstruction later, but maybe we can just talk about the initial recovery of the film.
Es una pregunta que me hacen a mí.
Well, for everyone, but for you, because you were all involved to some degree, but Valeria, perhaps you should begin because you're you.
Bueno, el film de Raúl Ruiz eran solamente 6 bobinas que encontramos en la bodega de un cine, el cine Normandí, que yo sabía que existían, pero nunca las había visto no conocía ese material. Y fue después de la muerte de Raúl, pasaron unos años, en que con Chamila y Galut decidimos retomar ese material y buscar una forma de terminarlo. Era muy poco material, era, a diferencia de la obra de Wells, realmente había que hacerlo con muy poco material. Ahora lo que yo sé y entiendo es que tanto Wells como Raúl eran personas que lo que más les gustaba era filmar. Y Raúl, si no podía terminar una película, pasaba a otra. Llegó a hacer 120 películas y su obsesión era filmar. Lograba terminar las películas gracias a los equipos europeos que se preocupaban de empujarlo a terminar las películas. Pues por eso que las películas, casi todas las que están sin terminar, son películas chilenas, donde era mucho más difícil conseguir equipos que le ayudaran a Raúl a terminar la película, y además por el problema de financiamiento. Eso.
También cuando estábamos haciendo la película anterior, la telenovela Errante, había algunos materiales que queríamos encontrar y había una investigación que estábamos desarrollando, y a través de gente que preguntábamos a personas de dónde podían estar estos materiales, nos indicaron que podía ser en las bodegas de un cine antiguo del casco del centro de Santiago, y ahí fuimos y nos dimos cuenta que nosotros estábamos buscando en ese momento telenovela errante que era en color, y esta referencia que nos habían dado respecto a este cine, el material que estaba ahí era en blanco y negro. Entonces ahí yo comentamos con Chamila, que estaba ese material, que qué película será esa, y ahí apareció Valeria, indicó eso es el Tango del Viudo, y lo dejamos como esperando ahí. Luego, cuando terminamos la telenovela errante, sucedió que nos gustó tanto trabajar juntos, que quisimos seguir trabajando en otra cosa, y Valeria nos dio como una especie como de autoridad de buscar en eso de material en blanco y negro que estaba en ese cine, y efectivamente era el Tango del Viudo, de lo cual empezamos a escarbar como en registros que pudiesen haber existido. La película estaba completamente muda, no tenía ningún sonido, no había ninguna pista que se pudiera rescatar, tampoco había guión, porque Raúl en ese momento, y quizás para después también, trabajaba sin guión, y tampoco nadie se acordaba mucho de lo que había sucedido en el rodaje. Hay algunos actores vivos, y productores, personas que de alguna manera estuvieron vinculadas, pero nadie se acordaba de nada respecto a la película. La única pista que teníamos la había dejado el mismo Raúl, en algún comentario, también con conversaciones con Valeria, que esa película había que consultarla con gente sorda, que manejara el lenguaje de señas como para poder leer las palabras que pudieran salir de las bocas, ¿no? Desde el silencio, y a través de esa lectura de las bocas y de los gestos y la posición física, empezar a interpretar textos que nos pudieran dar luz respecto a la ficción, porque este material estaba desmembrado, estaba desordenado, ¿no? Estaba completamente caótico lo que encontramos. Originalmente estaba bien clasificado, pero el interior era difícil encontrar una narrativa o algo que era como enfrentarse al vacío, y de alguna manera esa luz que nos dio Raúl en ese momento fue consultarlo con sordos, o personas sordas, que manejaran la lectura labiofacial. Sí.
Hola, aquí desde Chile, contenta de saludarlos a todos, las audiencias online. Ya sería bonito estar presencialmente, pero también es interesante esta nueva manera de conectar creatividad, interés en el cine. Para acompañar lo que dice Valeria y Galut, a veces me pasa que confundo la palabra Raúl con Galut, no sé por qué.
La U.
Sí. Es bien interesante lo que dicen, porque se encontró un material, bobinas de cine, desordenadas, caóticas, mudas, en silencio. Entonces hubo que construir completamente todo el sonido de la película, y para eso invitamos a 3 mujeres, un equipo de sordas de nacimiento profundo, que pudieron leer los labios y la expresión corporal, y de ahí apareció un texto, abstracto, bastante abstracto. Y Valeria, después de que aparece ese trabajo con las sordas, invita a Omar Saavedra Santi, guionista chileno que la ha acompañado ella en otros vuelos artísticos, a construir por primera vez un guión. Esta película se filmó en 1967, hace más de 50 años, material que estuvo guardado más de medio siglo, bastante dañado en la imagen. Entonces ese también fue otro proceso muy importante, que fue cómo restaurar toda la imagen y reconstruir por primera vez el sonido. Eso, fue como construir el sonido y reconstruir el montaje, que es el Tango del Viudo de Ruiz, pero de Ruiz Sarmiento es el Tango del Viudo y su espejo deformante, porque está muy bien articulada la película con 2 directores, Ruiz Sarmiento. Eso a mí me gusta mucho. Que está en esta película, no sé si más que en la telenovela Errante, que fue una película que con 2 directores, con 2 visiones, Ruiz Sarmiento, la telenovela Errante, el Tango del Viudo y su espejo deformante, el Tango del Viudo que tituló Ruiz, y su espejo deformante que dirigió Valeria Sarmiento. Y eso es lo que a mí que conforma el cuerpo del tango, el view y su espejo deformante, son la visión y la dirección de dos cineastas.
Great. I wanna turn to Bob and Philip now. I mean, it's I have a similar question, but also the circumstances of your film are quite different, of course. Can you talk about the relationship between sorry, you'll have to forgive me if there's like a weed whacker going on in the background. There's landscapers. But yeah, just sort of how this film grew out of the work you'd done on The Other Side of the Wind. You know, I was especially curious, I think, about once you found the material, how, you know, what the editing process looks like. We see like clappers and so on. So we assume that, you know, there's like a sort of, you know, end-to-end kind of thing going on with the reels, but I doubt it's that simple. And I'm also struck by how the film begins with Hopper lamenting editing, like as a thing. He's like lamenting, I guess, like the violence or the difficulty of editing the material he shot for the last movie. So sorry, that was a little long-winded, but take it away.
Yeah. In terms of origin, I mean, we didn't find the material. I mean, we had this in the 100 hours or so of materials for Other Side of the Wind. And when we went through this stuff, and I believe Bob watched this first one evening, and he can speak to that. But you know, my impression of it was that it wasn't something that fit the narrative arc and the script of Other Side of the Wind. This was something that was shot very early on in that production process. It was something, you know, the production started in August of '70. This was November of '70, and this felt like its own thing. You know, Bob had assembled it. I believe it was Bob and Dove, one of the assistant editors. They more or less assembled it kind of reel to reel. And I watched it and was fascinated by it. And I was struck by you know, different aspects of it at that time than I was more recently when I went back to it. But you know, it's something that we set aside during The Other Side of the Wind editing sessions. It didn't quite fit that. It didn't quite fit in terms of what Morgan Neville was doing with They'll Love Me When I'm Dead, which was the companion documentary to The Other Side of the Wind. And so it took about a year and a half, you know, 2 years for me to get over my Wells fatigue, to go back and revisit the material.
Well, I do think it was shot with the intention of being used in Other Side of the Wind. There was a, you know, there's the story of Other Side of the Wind is the story of an old filmmaker played by John Huston, playing the character of Jake Hannaford. And the sort of structure of the movie is around his 70th birthday party. And at the party, he's invited all these young filmmakers and cinephiles and film students to be part of the birthday party and also to film the party with their own cameras. So it's kind of a presented as a found footage type of movie. And Orson had invited a few actual real filmmakers from the time, Henry Jaglom, Paul Mazursky, Curtis Harrington, and Dennis Hopper. And he shot interviews with these guys, just planning on using little bits and pieces to intersperse throughout the party scene, in the introduction to the party scene. And I think at one point he was also planning on shooting little interviews between the Jake Hannaford character and these actual filmmakers, as if he was kind of interviewing them at the party and interacting with them. So typical of Wells, you know, he shot a lot more footage than he would have ever used. I think he was only planning on using what we actually used in the movie, and maybe a little bit more if he had actually shot the John Huston side of the conversation. But, you know, he was somebody who, like the director of the other movie, loved shooting. So ended up shooting a 2.5 hour long interview with Dennis Hopper. And when I saw the footage, I wanted to review all the footage to make sure that we had the right little snippets in the movie. And I just, I put it on one night and I just found it so fascinating that I ended up staying late watching the entire thing. And at some point along the way before we finished Other Side of the Wind, I went back in and basically did a rough edit of it using, it was shot with 2 cameras, so I just really wanted to have a version of it. So at some point, if somebody wanted to use it in the future, they would have sort of a rough assembly of like the best of the both cameras assembled in sequential order. And that was essentially the basis of what we ended up with for Hopper Wells.
Yeah, and kind of speaking to, you know, what you mentioned with the slates being in there, you know, so when I went back, and this was, I believe, over the summer, and I was kind of, you know, prompted or urged by a filmmaker, my friend Nick Ebeling, who did Along for the Ride. And so he knew that there was some material of Hopper, you know, from the Other Side of the Wind shoot, and he asked me how much there was, and we were having lunch, and I started talking to him very enthusiastically about what I remembered of that material. And at this point, it had been about 1.5 years since you know Bob and I and the whole team had finished Other Side of the Wind. So I remembered it very fondly, and I was describing bits and pieces to him, and he asked me to see some of it. And that's really what kind of started us on this journey. I showed him a bit, and he was really impressed. He felt like Hopper, you know, revealed a different side of himself that he hadn't seen, and he really was so familiar with Hopper's body of work, but also with a lot of the interview footage, and he had a relationship with David and with Henry and with everybody else. So he started talking within just that sphere, that, you know, within the Hopper sphere, and so he was, you know, as familiar with them as, you know, Bob and I and everybody else had become with everybody within the Wells world. And by that point, it slowly started to leak out that, you know, what this material was. And eventually I got a phone call from one of the programmers in Venice, and that's where we had premiered Other Side of the Wind. And so Julia called up very curious as to what we had, and asked to see a little piece of the film. And her response really surprised me, because, you know, it's obviously I felt like there was something very timely about it. And that's what I alluded to earlier, is I really remembered the first 30-40 minutes of the film, and the film as it was assembled, kind of, you know, from slate to rollout, remained the same. But, you know, in the intervening 2 years, but the world had changed. And suddenly, you know, the entire political discourse and you know, Wells's insistence on Hopper revealing, you know, his political allegiances, or, you know, why he wasn't politically active at this time, and being, as he dubbed him, this reluctant revolutionary, I felt like that material became incredibly timely. And, you know, so I understood when I had that conversation with Julia. She said, "This is incredible." Julia being the programmer from Venice, saying, "I think this is an incredibly important historical document. You know, I think you should look into finishing this, and if you do, we'd love to have it in Venice." And so, you know, I started thinking about it, and obviously, you know, first thing I did was picked up the phone and called up Bob, and he wasn't surprised at all. He was just, you know, it seemed as if he was just waiting for that phone call, and we jumped straight into it.
Great. I'd love to follow up about Hopper as like this film's portrait of Hopper as a political figure, because I think it is like a new kind of wrinkle, a little bit to our perception of that, at least. But I want to go back to Valeria and Galut and Chamila for a moment. I guess this is mostly a question for Valeria, because of course you knew Raúl the best, and I know that I would be remiss not to ask about Raúl's relationship with Wells's work. I believe Mr. Arkadin / Confidential Report was a very important film for Raúl, unless I'm conflating it with something else. But I know that there was like I know there's some kind of a, you know, artistic bond there, even if I don't know if they met ever. But could you talk a bit about that?
No, Raúl y Wells nunca se conocieron, pero Raúl admiraba mucho a Wells, eso lo sé. Y sé que una vez un amigo, no me acuerdo el nombre, envió un mensaje a Raúl diciendo que Wells había visto las películas de Raúl y que les parecía muy interesante. Y Raúl estaba muy contento de haber recibido ese mensaje, pero nunca se conocieron. Es lo que puedo decir. En todo caso, lo que los unía era el amor por filmar. Raúl adoraba filmar, y yo creo que Wells se nota en la película esta que la adoraba filmar también.
We can address this quickly. What about Hopper? Because I would have imagined that something like the last movie would have left quite an impression on Raúl.
Raúl no conocía mucho a Hopper.
Okay, cool. And then I'd like to just ask, you worked on almost all of Raúl's like 100+ films. So I'm just curious, the Tango of the Widower would have been his first feature, I believe, had it been completed at the time. But then, so I'm wondering, for you as his sort of eternal collaborator, what your impressions were of sort of completing a film of his that actually, I believe, preceded your collaboration.
Digamos que yo, cuando vi el material, me di cuenta que el material era muy corto para hacer un largometraje, y me recordé que Raúl siempre quiso hacer una película que fuera en un sentido y en otro, una ficción que se mirara en un espejo. Él había hecho algunos ejercicios en el Instituto Nacional del Audiovisual en Francia, que eran unos pequeños cortometrajes que se hacían de esa forma. Y yo pensé que quizás para Raúl habría sido la solución, y en el fondo pensé que Raúl le gustaría que la película se hubiera terminado así.
And Bob and Philip, this is another sort of question, I guess, about the kind of the landscape of filmmakers at the time, and I'm just Hopper very early in the film is like talking about a number of the sort of great like European modernists of the 60s, and he talks about Len René, Buñuel, Fellini, Antonioni, and so the political thing notwithstanding, this is also like one of Hopper's great like feats of film criticism in this film in some ways. Mm-hmm. It's like the most protracted discussion I've ever heard from him about like actual filmmakers. So I was just wondering, sort of like, for all the discussion of the art and the craft and so on of cinema and the film, sort of like what your impressions were of listening to Hopper talk about like the medium in this way.
I mean, it's funny. I think he false starts quite a few of the conversation, right? I think he's just like name checking to see how familiar Wells is with some of these filmmakers. I mean, Wells had been in Europe for 12 years, from 58 to 70, and it's more along the lines of, have you seen Visconti's The Damned? You have? Oh, okay. What about So it's one of those where I feel like he's trying to, as he is for a great deal of the conversation, showcase that he is very film literate, and a lot of it is kind of dropping. I think Viridiana, I think he kind of dives in a little bit deeper. I don't know. What do you think, Bob?
Well, but he also kind of confuses a few of the films. He refers to De Sica's film Umberto Diaz Villoloni, which was obviously not De Sica, and so I think a lot of it is posturing, and I think what's also interesting is that the films we're talking about were films that Orson like actively like despised. Orson was very much against like Antonioni, and sort of made Other Side of the Wind as a response to these European art films that he thought were unbearable and overly pretentious. So I think it's also interesting to see that side of it, where Orson was mostly just aggravated by the films that Hopper was talking about.
maybe I'll ask you both sides of the conversation like one more question. We'll see if we have any questions from the audience. I think we already have a few. But I guess just back to Hopper Wells for a moment. I guess yeah, I guess we can address like some of the like political discussion in the film and Wells attempting to get Hopper, or my sense of it was he was trying to get Hopper to kind of commit to like anything whatsoever, as opposed to just like it seems like he was most responsive to like a radical like vibe, if not actual like radical politics. So yeah, I was just wondering sort of now, like in what ways did working on this, looking at this material and working on it kind of shift your perception of Hopper's politics? Because you get the sense of someone who's like very worried about what people will think that he thinks about politics, but sorry, go ahead.
I think part of it is you see somebody who's very uncomfortable in the role that he's been cast in, because of, kind of what happened in terms of the counterculture situation after Easy Rider. I mean, it's if you're comfortable in that role, you don't go and hide away in Taos, New Mexico in a commune. But in some respects, as much as the film or the material, has its dramatic tension and foretells what's going to be happening with Hopper's career, not only because of the editing, but because of how he's talking about last movie, but also in terms of what we come to know later on about his political allegiances.
And it's for Valeria, Galut, and Chamila. So I'd be curious to know, sort of with the Tango of the Widower, it occurs to me that it's perhaps Raúl would have liked like this. Maybe he was into quantum physics, but it's kind of like a film that's it's in a superposition. It's both in 1967 and in 2020, and I think maybe he would have liked the fact that it was in neither time. But I'm wondering, but for you, for all of you, where does the film sort of sit in the larger of, if it's kind of if it's in both places, both historical places at the same time?
Galut le va a responder, yo creo, ¿no?
Pasa que primero, estoy hablando desde el proceso del montaje, que es como desde donde nació lo que estás describiendo también ahora. Pero desde el montaje, cuando estábamos haciendo y logramos como articular con Valeria como un primer corte como muy narrativo, que parecía muy, muy correcto, que quedó así como de alguna manera, nos parecía que era demasiado correcto para ser Raúl. Entonces empezamos a tratar de ser un poco, quizá, entre comillas, ¿no? Insolentes con respecto a eso que veíamos que nos parecía que era muy correcto, es decir, como que tenía un principio, un desarrollo, un final, todo muy bien contadito, estaba todo muy bien en esa versión, pero esto que no es el primer taller de cine que hizo Raúl, ¿no? Raúl que quería llegar más allá, seguro, con esto. Y ahí fue que Valeria apareció con una sorpresa maravillosa, de una ocurrencia en diálogo de ella con sus recuerdos con Raúl. Todo lo que estoy describiendo, que puede ser muy psicológico o incluso psíquico, para mí es muy político. Entonces apareció con esta idea de hacer un rewind de la película y que la película termine como en su inicio, haciendo como un ejercicio casi de provocación con respecto a esa historia que recientemente habías visto en la segunda parte de la película, ¿no? Que es el reverse. Y ahí, claro, apareció esto que de alguna manera vincula los dos tiempos y, como decía Chamila, los dos directores, que son como dos creadores, un creador y una creadora, de un mismo objeto, un mismo cuerpo, un mismo hijo, si quieres, audiovisual arcaico y nuevo. Y yo lo sitúo dentro, claro, un ejercicio quizá arqueológico por un lado, genealógico por otro, y de profunda creación. Y ahí apareció que, bueno, si estamos tratando de articular los diálogos que vienen desde la mudez total, desde el silencio absoluto, y nosotros leyendo las bocas, tratando de poner diálogos ahí, ya nos orientamos, ya tenemos una historia. Bueno, ahora esos mismos diálogos sonarían al revés, con palabras al revés, y darían un nuevo lenguaje que es específico para esta película. Y en función a palabras y encuentros de palabras de Raúl con su diálogo con los actores en el 67, entonces hoy en día lo ponemos al revés y aparece una película completamente nueva. Entonces ahí fue cuando, claro, dijimos, de alguna manera, encontramos la película experimental que queríamos hacer. Queríamos siempre hacer una película experimental desde el origen, por eso nos atrevimos a cuestionar este resultado que nosotros habíamos logrado, que era como tan aristotélico, por decirlo de alguna manera, y atrevernos a sumergirnos en el sonido de la película, que es como toda la segunda parte, que es mucho más sensorial, con el hallazgo de la voz, ¿no? Fue como al final, así casi terminando la película, como un pequeño broche al final de la voz en off de la segunda parte, que es como el mismo viudo hablándose a sí mismo como si fuera otro, en ese ejercicio de desdoblamiento que Raúl siempre ejercía, o en la mayoría de sus películas, justamente como la multiplicación de los cuerpos.
Y apareció otro cómplice de Valeria y de Ruiz también, que es Jorge Aragada, y compone una música contemporánea que como que rompe también y se incrusta en la película de manera muy contemporánea, muy también expresiva. Y eso también le dio una atmósfera a momentos muy potentes que resuenan, no sé, la música de Jorge Aragada es bien potente, entonces creo que también fue como una luz que apareció en un momento, así como la voz en off.
El serrucho.
Fue el serrucho, porque Jorge Aragada grabó serrucho, el instrumento muy casual, muy casero, muy, no sé, y también una orquesta de vidrios. Entonces son sonidos extraños que Valeria dialogó con Jorge Aragada, y eso encuentro que la película le dio una iluminación distinta, una identidad también, muy contemporánea. Parece.
Before we run out of time, I want to get some of our audience questions. I guess I'll begin with the first name that jumps out at me, which is the film critic Jonathan Rosenbaum has offered a comment and a question. This is for Philip and Bob. He said, Wells revered, well, first is the comment, Wells revered De Sica and much of Fellini, and he certainly respected Buñuel, Dreyer, and other European art directors. He disliked Antonioni, René, and Bresson, but I don't think one can call him hostile to European art films in general. But then he asks, may I ask when, if ever, The Other Side of the Wind might become available on DVD and Blu-ray?
Awesome. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, Jonathan.
We're working on it. I think it's I think no secret that Netflix has been working together with Criterion, releasing some of their catalog. Obviously, I'm not a party to those conversations. I know that they've taken place and continue to take place. I know that it's I think for our part in terms of because I know that, Jonathan, you're referring to Other Side of the Wind in that question. in terms of this title, obviously this is a totally separate film with a totally separate set of rights. And so, you know, if there's a possibility to, let's say, you know, inspire both parties to come to some type of a deal, you know, using this title, using Hopper Wells to be able to do so, you know, we'll certainly try.
Cool. And another question for you guys from Harshal Alarcón, who it's kind of long, so I'll just boil it down to, this person is curious if you think this conversation between Wells and Hopper had any influence on Hopper's subsequent work or his way with editing, perhaps as early, I don't know if the timing would have made sense for the last movie to...
He was still editing it.
Yeah. Although he talks about it like it's so past tense, but you can tell it's not really. But yeah, so I don't know. I guess it's kind of about the what kind of footprint do you think this conversation left on him?
I don't feel that he took any of Orson's advice. Orson always talked about being the enemy of the film and being very hard on the footage and being tough with the movie. And I think the way last movie turned out and was sort of kind of the opposite, a guy who was, you know, very self-indulgent and, you know, ended up kind of paying the price when it was critically and popularly poorly received. I think over the years, people now have a different impression of it, but at the time, I think it was just seen as a sort of a very self-indulgent project. And so I don't think he did listen to Orson. And I don't know if he ever did. I do think he respected Orson as a filmmaker. And I think Orson also respected, I think the feeling was mutual. So that's all I can say.
But it was interesting in terms of the fact that, you know, both were working on films, obviously at different stages, you know, about films that were metafiction. And Orson does ask him about, you know, how is the film within the film going to be shown? I mean, this is, you know, to the best of our knowledge, a lot of this stuff was still taking shape in Wells's mind in terms of how he was going to construct Other Side of the Wind. So it's interesting, you know, what he asks and how he asks it.
Question for Valeria, Galut, and Chamila, sort of speculation about the existence of even more incomplete Ruiz films, which could perhaps find their completion or their transformation in 2021 or later.
Sí, exactamente. Estamos en este momento en el proceso de terminar otra película de Raúl que se llamó El Realismo Socialista y que es una película que él filmó un poco antes del golpe de Estado sobre un tema muy político que era cómo se vivía el socialismo en Chile en nivel de poblaciones y en nivel de las clases medias e intelectuales. Estamos en ese proceso y estamos trabajando en ello.
Tenemos Ruiz para rato, todavía.
Respecto a lo que pasa es que justamente Realismo Socialista es el nuevo proyecto que está como en una especie de brasa aún, antes de que se encienda todo. Tiene que ver con lo que estábamos hablando antes de la política también, ¿no? Está vinculado, esta visión se quiere hacer como una comparación, pero el cine de la época, de hecho en el mismo contexto de Tango del Viudo, en su momento que Raúl filmó el 67, Chile, o el cine, está realmente politizado en una visión como instrumental al servicio de ideología, en su mayoría. Los directores querían de alguna manera, el cine era una herramienta política de concientización, de observación, también de cosas utilitarias, así como directas, como de educación y de formación de las masas para instruir dentro de lo que era, qué sé yo, el aparato guevarista de los partidos de Che Guevara, de la guerrilla. Y Raúl aparece entre medio de esa... Valeria me puede contradecir completamente vosotros. Aparece entre medio de esa... ¿Ah?
Ya lo estoy pensando.
Entre medio de ese contexto, y aparece con, por ejemplo, esta película que era acerca de un señor que qué sé yo, que se perturba psíquicamente por la muerte de su esposa, y su esposa lo empieza como a circundar en esta realidad a propósito del traspaso de un fantasma que empieza a habitar su cotidiano. Entonces, completamente contrario a lo que podría decirse el uso ideológico de la película, era más que bien hacer cine por el amor al cine, y de lo cual Raúl era absolutamente fanático, creo. Y Realismo Socialista, que es este nuevo proyecto, justamente se ancla en una forma de ver el realismo por los soviéticos, ¿no? Que era también un arte utilitario, que está al servicio de lo social, y Raúl de alguna manera lo pone como en tensión en esta película, haciendo de alguna manera una sátira, en un tono muy espeluznantemente irónico, respecto a lo que estaba sucediendo en Chile durante el gobierno de la Unidad Popular, en la relación de las como las bases proletarias con la representación de sus partidos que supuestamente lo guiaban hacia una revolución y hacia un nuevo Chile socialista. Ahí está anclada la película, y es una mirada muy divertida y muy crítica, sobre todo respecto al proceso histórico de Chile, que de alguna manera hoy también se está replicando, hoy en lo que eran las calles del país hasta hace un poco tiempo atrás, que estaban, la verdad, alzadas en una nueva idea de país. ¿Tú tienes?
I think we're almost out of time, but I wanted to just take this this last little bit of time that we have to sort of clear out. And if Bob and Philip, if you have any questions for Valeria and Galut and Chamila, it could just be, you know, it could be about process, the film itself, whatever you like, and then you guys are welcome to do that as well, or we can just call it a day. Whatever works. So, Philip and Bob, do you guys have any questions?
Gracias por la invitación.
You can take a moment too. I don't mean to.
Yo creo que los festivales de cine del mundo van a crear una nueva sección de cine de arqueología del cine, o de cine ultratumba, de cine de fantasma, porque
un nuevo género.
Sí, está apareciendo películas que hoy en día están más vivas que nunca, y entonces tendría que haber una sección en los nuevos festivales de cine,
sí,
de cine de arqueología.
Sí. Yo, en este suceso que estamos, en este, ¿cómo se dice?
Resurrections.
Estoy alucinado porque de alguna manera siento como una...
We'll talk after the
talk. Una sincronización entre los fantasmas latinoamericanos y los fantasmas norteamericanos.
Muchas gracias por la invitación, como
Muchas
siempre.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Ha sido muy interesante. Un gusto a todos.
Pleasure. Yeah, and Philip and Bob, I guess you can just say your whatever you want to say before we go, and we can leave it there.
I mean, on my end, thanks for having us. You know, we premiered Alice Tully for Other Side of the Wind 2 years ago in 2018. So this one has taken a similar path, going from Venice to NYFF. So thanks again for having us at the festival. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for having us all together on the panel, because we're all sort of doing similar things, trying to get into the head of a filmmaker who's no longer with us, and figuring out his intentions, and trying to do justice to a project that was, unable to be finished long ago. So I think it's great that we could all be together talking about this kind of unique way of making films when the director is no longer here.
Well, thank you all. Hopefully next time we'll all be together in person. Imagine that. But until then, take care, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Chao. Adiós.